The transport ship shuddered as it broke through the atmosphere of the uncharted planet, and Lieutenant Maya Brooks gripped the armrest of her seat with white knuckles around her. The rest of the human exploration team sat in various states of anxiety as the vessel descended toward the surface of a world that had never seen human footsteps before. The mission was supposed to be simple and collect mineral samples and document any life forms and return to the orbital station within 48 hours. But the universe had a way of making simple things complicated, and Maya had learned that lesson more times than she cared to remember. She glanced at the other members of her team, and Dr. Lisa Grant sat across from her reviewing data on her tablet, and her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun that made her look more severe than she actually was. Next to Lisa sat Corporal Jake Morris, and a young man barely out of training who kept checking his weapon with nervous energy that betrayed his inexperience. The pilot and Lieutenant Commander Stephen Hayes called back from the cockpit, and his voice steady despite the turbulence, landing in 3 minutes and the surface looked stable. Maya unbuckled her harness and moved toward the front of the cabin to get a better view through the viewport, and what she saw took her breath away. The planet below was a swirling mix of deep purples and vibrant blues, with massive crystalline formations jutting from the surface like the spines of some ancient beast, and forests of towering vegetation that seemed to pulse with bioluminescent light, covered vast stretches of land between rocky outcroppings. And in the distance, a range of mountains stretched toward a sky filled with 3 small moonsets. Beautiful, Lisa said from behind her, and her voice filled with wonder. Maya nodded but kept her focus on the landscape. And beautiful things were often the most dangerous, and she had learned that lesson on more worlds than she could count. The ship touched down with a gentle thud, and the landing struts absorbing most of the impact, and Stephen powered down the engines. And the sudden silence was almost deafening after hours of engine noise. "All right, people," Maya said, and turning to face her team, "and we stick together and stay within visual range at all times. And if you see anything unusual, and I mean anything, you report it immediately. And we are not here to be heroes, and we are here to do a job and get home, understood?" Lieutenant Jake said, and already moving toward the cargo bay to retrieve the equipment. Lisa was right behind him, and her scientific curiosity clearly overriding any sense of caution she might have had, and Maya made a mental note to keep a close eye on the doctor, and scientists had a tendency to wander off when something caught their interest. The cargo bay door hissed open, and the ramp extending to touch the alien soil, and Maya was the first one out, and her boots crunching on a surface that looked like gravel but had a slightly crystalline quality to it, and the air was breathable according to their sensors. But she kept her rebreather handy just in case. The temperature was comfortable and maybe 70 degrees by Earth standards, and the gravity was slightly lighter than what they were used to, which made each step feel almost bouncy. And Maya took a moment to survey their surroundings, and her hand resting on the weapon at her hip. They had landed in a clearing surrounded by the strange bioluminescent forest, and the trees, if they could be called that, were unlike anything Maya had ever seen, and their trunks were smooth and almost translucent, and she could see some kind of fluid moving through them like blood through veins, and the leaves were broad and flat, and they glowed with a soft blue-green light that pulsed in a rhythm that seemed almost like breathing. "This is incredible," Lisa said, and already taking readings with her scanner, "and the biodiversity here is off the charts, and these organisms are unlike anything in our databases." Jake set up a perimeter sensor, while Stephen began running diagnostics on the ship to make sure they would be able to leave when the time came, and Maya coordinated the efforts, and making sure everyone stayed on task. They worked efficiently for the first hour and collecting samples and taking readings and documenting everything they found, and Lisa was particularly excited about some kind of fungus that grew on the base of the glowing trees, and it secreted a substance that seemed to have remarkable properties. "This could revolutionize medicine," Lisa said, and carefully storing a sample in a containment unit. "And the molecular structure is unlike anything we have." Maya was about to respond when Jake called out from the perimeter, "Lieutenant, and we have got movement and something big and coming from the northwest." Maya immediately drew her weapon and signaled for everyone to fall back toward the ship, and through the trees she could see shapes moving and large forms that moved with a predatory grace that set off every alarm in her combat-trained mindhold. "Your fire," Maya ordered, and her voice calm, despite the adrenaline surging through her, "and let's see what we are dealing with." The shapes emerged from the forest, and Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. They were not creatures and they were beings and humanoid in form, but clearly alien, and they stood easily 7 feet tall with powerful muscular builds, and their skin was a deep midnight blue that seemed to shimmer in the light, and their faces were angular and almost elegant with high cheekbones and large eyes that glowed with an amber light. But what struck Maya most was not their appearance, but the way they moved, and there was an intelligence in their eyes and a purposefulness in their approach that spoke of civilization and culture. There were 5 of them, and all armed with weapons that looked organic and like they had been grown, rather than manufactured, and they fanned out in a tactical formation that any human soldier would recognize. Maya kept her weapon lowered but ready, and her team behind her in a protective formation. "Lieutenant, what do we do?" Jake whispered, and his voice tight with tension. "We try to communicate," Maya said, and her eyes never leaving the lead alien who had stopped about 20 meters away. The alien studied them for a long moment, and then slowly lowered his weapon, and the others followed suit, and he raised one hand in what could have been a universal gesture of peace. Maya took a calculated risk and holstered her weapon, and then raised her own hand in response. The lead alien stepped forward, and his movements fluid and controlled, and as he got closer, Maya could see more details, and he wore some kind of armor. Or perhaps it was just his natural skin that looked like interlocking plates. And across his chest was a series of markings that could have been tattoos or scars. He stopped a few feet away and studied Maya with those glowing amber eyes. And then he spoke, and his voice deep and resonant with a quality that seemed to vibrate in her chest. The sounds were complex and melodic, but completely unintelligible. And Maya activated her translator unit and hoping it would pick up patterns. "I am Lieutenant Maya Brooks," she said slowly and pointing to herself. "And we come in peace. And we mean you no harm." The alien tilted his head and listening to the translator, and then his eyes widened slightly, and he tapped something on his wrist, and a device that seemed to be part of his armory or device speaks the ancient trade tongue, he said, and his words now coming through clear if slightly accented, "and you are from beyond the sky." Maya felt relief wash over her, "And yes, and we are explorers, and we did not know this world was inhabited, and we mean no intrusion." The aliens studied her for a moment longer and then seemed to come to a decision. "And I am called Zareth of the Kaelin," he said, "and you are on the breeding grounds of our people, and this is sacred land." Maya felt her stomach drop, "and we did not know, and we will leave immediately." Zareth held up a hand, "And the others of his people are approaching, and they will not be as understanding as I am, and you must come with me, and I will offer you protection until this can be resolved." Maya glanced back at her team, and Stephen looked skeptical, and Lisa looked fascinated, and Jake looked terrified. "How do we know we can trust you?" Maya asked. "You do not," Zareth said simply. But you have no other choice, and the others will kill you on sight for trespassing, and I am offering you a chance to live." Maya weighed her options, and they could try to make it back to the ship, but if there were more of these Kael coming, they would be sitting ducks and they could fight. But they were outnumbered and outgunned on an alien world. Or they could trust this Zareth and hope his offer was genuine. Stephen, Maya said quietly, "And can we get the ship powered up quickly?" He shook his head, "And not quickly enough, and if they have more of those weapons, we are in trouble." Maya made her decision, "And we go with him," and she said to Zareth, But my team stays together." Zareth nodded, "And of course, and gather your equipment, and we must move quickly." They hurried to collect the most essential gear, and Lisa insisted on bringing her samples, and Jake grabbed extra ammunition, and Stephen locked down the ship with a security code that would make it difficult for anyone to access. Zareth led them into the forest and moving at a pace that was challenging, even with the lighter gravity, and his people flanked them and weapons ready, but not pointed at the humans. Maya stayed close to Zareth, and her mind racing with questions. "Why are you helping us?" she asked as they navigated through the glowing trees. Zareth did not look back, and his focus on the path ahead. "And because I have seen what happens when fear rules decisions, and my people have been isolated too long. And perhaps it is time we learned that we are not alone in the universe." They traveled for what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes before they reached what appeared to be a settlement, and structures rose from the ground like they had been carved from the same crystalline rock that dotted the landscape, and they glowed with the same bioluminescent light as the trees. Zareth led them to a large building near the center of the settlement, and inside the space was open and surprisingly comfortable with furnishings that, while alien, were clearly designed for sitting and resting. "You will be safe here," Zareth said, and turning to face them, "And I must Speak with the elders and convince them not to execute you for your transgression. Execute, Jake said, and his voice cracking slightly. Maya put a hand on his shoulder, and steady Corporal Zareth looked at Maya and his expression unreadable. And I will do what I can, but you must understand, and the breeding grounds are sacred to my people, and the penalty for intrusion is death. With that he left, and leaving 2 guards at the door, Lisa immediately began examining the room and taking readings, and cataloging everything she saw, and Steven started planning escape routes, and Jake just sat down heavily and put his head in his hands. Maya paced and trying to think of a way out of this mess. Hours passed and the light outside shifted from day to night, and the bioluminescence growing stronger and more vibrant, and they were brought food and strange fruits and something that tasted like bread, but had a nutty flavor, and water that was clean and refreshing. They ate in silence and each lost in their own thoughts. It's fascinating, Lisa said eventually, and this whole culture built around bioluminescence and the architecture and the technology, and it's all organic, Maya grunted, and it's fascinating, until they decide to kill us for stepping on their sacred grounds. Steven checked his sidearm for the 3rd time, and we might have to fight our way out. Maya shook her head, and against an entire settlement and on their home territory, and we would not make it 10 meters. So what do we do, Jake? Asked. We wait, Maya said, and we trust that Zareth meant what he said. It was long past dark when Zareth finally returned, and he looked tired, and there was tension in his posture that had not been there before. The elders have agreed to hear your case, he said. But I must warn you, and they are not inclined toward mercy. Maya stood. And what do we need to do? You will present yourself before the council at dawn, Zareth said. And you will explain why you came here and why you should be allowed to live, and if they decide against us, Maya asked. Then I will do what I can to help you escape, Zareth said. But it will mean exile for me and my family. Maya felt the weight of that. And why would you do that for us? And we are strangers. Zareth met her eyes, and there was something in his gaze that made her breath catch, and because it is the right thing to do. And because I believe the universe is larger than our small corner of it. And because he paused and then continued, and because I have seen enough death. Maya nodded slowly, and thank you. Zareth inclined his head, and rest while you can, and tomorrow will be difficult. He left again, and this time without guards. And Maya realized he was trusting them not to run. Lisa spoke up, and her voice quiet. And he's taking a huge risk for us. Steven frowned. And why though, and what's in it for him? Maybe nothing, Maya said, and maybe he's just a good person. They tried to rest, but sleep was elusive, and Maya found herself staring at the ceiling and watching the way the bioluminescent light played across the organic surface. She must have dozed off eventually, because she woke to Zareth gently shaking her shoulder, and dawn was breaking outside, and the light filtering through openings in the wall sits. Time, he said. Maya roused her team, and they followed Zareth through the settlement, and beings of his species stopped to stare as they passed, and some with curiosity and others with open hostility. The council chamber was in the largest structure, and a building that seemed to grow from the very bedrock of the planet, and inside the space was vast and circular, with a raised platform in the center surrounded by tiers of seating. 7 figures sat on the highest tier, and all of them older than Zareth, and their skin marked with intricate patterns that glowed faintly. Zareth led Maya to the center platform, and the rest of her team was directed to stand at the edge of the room. The eldest of the council spoke, and her voice strong despite her apparent age. And you stand accused of trespassing on sacred ground, and the penalty is death, and speak now. If you have reason why this sentence should not be carried out. Maya took a deep breath and stepped forward and honored elders. And we came to your world in ignorance and not malice. And we are explorers from a distant world and seeking knowledge and understanding. And we did not know this land was sacred, and we did not know anyone lived here. And had we known, we would never have set foot on your soil. One of the council members, and a male with scars across his face, leaned forward. And ignorance is not innocence, and you violated our most sacred space and endangered the future of our species. Maya felt her frustration rising, and we made a mistake. But does that mistake deserve death? And we are willing to make amends and to learn your ways and to ensure this never happens again. The scarred council member snarled. And you offer words, and words mean nothing. Another council member, and this one female with kind eyes, spoke up. And yet Zareth speaks for them, and he vouches for their character. The scarred one turned on Zareth. And you risk much for these aliens. I risk what is necessary. Zareth said, and his voice firm, "and we have lived in isolation for generations and fearful of the outside, and perhaps it is time we opened our eyes to the possibility that not all who come from beyond the sky wish us harm." The debate raged for what felt like hours, and Maya, standing silently in the center and willing herself not to show fear or anger or any emotion that might be used against them. Finally, the eldest raised her hand and silence fell. "We have heard both sides," she said, and we must now make a decision, but first, and I would know more of these humans and you," she said, and pointing at Maya, "and tell me of your world." Maya blinked in surprise by the question, and my world is called Earth, and it's a planet much like this one, but with different life and different challenges. And we have overcome much to reach the stars, and we explore, because we seek to understand and to find our place in the universe. "And what would you do if you found others like us?" the eldest asked. "And others who did not want to be found, we would respect their wishes," Maya said, and without hesitation, "and we would leave them in peace." The eldest studied her for a long moment and then nodded slowly. "And I believe you speak truth," and she said, but belief is not enough." And the council turned and spoke among themselves in low voices, and finally, they turned back. "We have decided," the eldest said, "and you will not be executed." Maya felt relief flood through her, but the eldest continued, "And you will remain here for one cycle of our moon and approximately 60 of your days. And during this time, you will learn our ways and prove that you can be trusted. And if at the end of this time you have proven yourself worthy, and you will be allowed to leave. And if not—" She paused. "And then the original sentence will be carried out." Maya swallowed hard, and 60 days was a long time, but it was better than immediate execution, "and I accept your terms." The eldest nodded, "And Zareth will be responsible for you, and he will teach you and guide you. And should you fail, and his punishment will be the same as yours." Maya glanced at Zareth and saw no fear in his eyes and only determination. The council dismissed them, and Zareth led Maya and her team to a different building, and larger and more comfortable than the holding cell they had spent the night. "And you did well," Zareth said once they were alone. Maya shook her head. "And I got us sentenced to 60 days of probation. You got us not executed." Stephen pointed out. Zareth smiled, and it was the first time Maya had seen him do so, and it transformed his face in making him look younger and less severe. And that is indeed a victory. Over the following days, Maya and her team began to learn about the Kale, and their culture was rich and complex and built around a deep connection to the planet and its cycles. The breeding grounds they had landed on were sacred because it was where the Kale came during the mating season, and a time when their biology underwent changes that made them particularly vulnerable and protective of their territory. Zareth explained this to Maya as they walked through the forest and gathering plants for the evening meal. "During the breeding cycle," he said, "and our bodies produce hormones that drive us to seek mates and to protect our chosen partners, and it is a time of great emotion and great danger." Maya listened and fascinated despite herself. "And is that why the council was so angry?" "Yes," Zareth said. "And to intrude during this time is to risk triggering responses that are beyond our control." "What kind of responses?" Maya asked. Zareth hesitated. "And violence and possessiveness and a need to claim and protect that overrides rational thought." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. "And that sounds dangerous." "It can be," Zareth admitted. "And which is why we isolate ourselves during these times, and why your intrusion was seen as such a threat as the days passed." Maya found herself spending more and more time with Zareth, and he was patient and kind and surprisingly funny once she got to know him, and he taught her about the plants and the animals and the intricate web of life that made up his world. Lisa was in heaven and constantly taking samples and making observations, and Stephen remained wary, but even he began to relax as it became clear the Kale meant them no immediate harm, and Jake slowly came out of his shell and started making friends with some of the younger Kale, but it was Maya who Zareth focused on, and teaching her the language and the customs and the ways of his people. She learned that the Kale valued honor above all else, and that loyalty and courage were traits they admired. And she learned that they had a deep respect for life and for the balance of nature. She also learned that Zareth was considered something of an outsider among his own people, and his willingness to help the humans had confirmed what many already suspected, and that he did not always follow tradition. "Why did you really help us?" Maya asked one evening as they sat watching the sunset and the sky turning shades. Of purple and gold. Zareth was quiet for a long moment, and when I was young, he said finally, and I left my world and traveled to the outer settlements. And I met beings from other species and other worlds, and I learned that we Kale are not the center of the universe and that our ways are not the only ways, and when I returned home I found my people had become even more isolated and more fearful, and I did not want to see them destroy something precious out of that fear. And we were precious, Maya asked with a small smile. You were unknown, Zareth said, and meeting her eyes, and the unknown can be a gift if we are brave enough to embrace it. Maya felt something shift between them, and something that went beyond simple friendship or alliance. The weeks passed and Maya and her team became more integrated into Kale society, and they participated in communal meals and learned to craft tools from the organic materials of the forest and even joined in some of the recreational activities. But as the 60th day approached, Maya began to notice changes in Zareth, and he became more tense and more protective, and there was a restlessness to him that had not been there before. One evening, as they walked back from the forest, Maya asked him about Itzareth. Stopped and turned to face her. And the breeding cycle is beginning, he said. And his voice strained. Maya felt her heart rate increase. And what does that mean? It means, Zareth said, and that my biology is preparing for mating, and it means that my control is not what it should be. Maya took a step back, and should I be worried? Zareth closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were glowing brighter than usual. And I would never hurt you, Maya, but you should know. And the hormones, and they are affecting how I perceive you. How do you perceive me? Maya asked, and her voice barely above a whisper, as mine, Zareth said, and the words coming out rough and as someone to protect and to claim and to keep safe. And I know this is not rational, and I know you are not Kyle, and I know you will leave when your 60 days are complete, but my biology does not care about any of that. Maya did not know what to say. And she had grown close to Zareth over the past weeks, and closer than she had intended, and there was something about him that drew her in, and his strength and his honor and his kindness. But he was alien, and this was temporary, and she had a life waiting for her back on Earth. I should go, she said finally. Zareth nodded, and his jaw tight, and yes, and you should. But Maya did not move, and she stood there and staring at him, and seeing the conflict in his eyes. You should go, Zareth said again, and his voice pained. Maya made a decision and stepped forward instead of back. And what if I do not want to go? Zareth went very still, and Maya. And you do not understand what you are saying. I understand more than you think, Maya said. And I understand that you have been nothing but honorable and kind. And I understand that you risked everything for us, and I understand that I feel something for you that I have never felt for anyone else. Zareth reached out and took her hand, and his touch gentle despite the obvious tension in his body. And this is the hormones talking, he said. And for both of us. And the breeding cycle affects those around us as well, maybe Maya said, or maybe this is just what it is. Zareth pulled her closer, and his amber eyes searching her face. And if we do this, he said, and if we allow this to happen, and there is no going back, and the bond created during the breeding cycle is permanent. Maya felt her breath catch, and permanent, among the Kale. Zareth said, and when we mate during the breeding cycle, and we bond, and it is a connection that lasts a lifetime, and I would be yours, and you would be mine, and in every way that matters. Maya knew she should be terrified, and she barely knew this being and this alien, from a world she had stumbled onto by accident. But instead she felt a sense of rightness and of certainty that she had never experienced before. Then bond with me, she said. Zareth made a sound low in his throat and pulled her against him, and his lips found hers in a kiss that was nothing like anything Maya had ever experienced. And it was not just physical, and there was something deeper and something that seemed to resonate in her very soul. They stumbled back to his dwelling, and hands and mouths desperate and urgent. And somewhere in the back of her mind, Maya knew this was crazy and knew she should stop, but her body had other ideas. Zareth was gentle, despite his obvious need, and taking his time and making sure she was ready. And when they finally came together, Maya felt something shift inside her, and like a door opening in her mind and her heart, she could feel Zareth, and not just physically but emotionally. And she could sense his desire and his devotion and his absolute commitment to her. The bond, Zareth whispered against her skin. And do you feel it? Yes, Maya breathed. And I feel. They made love through the night, and each time deepening the connection between them, and by dawn, Maya knew that Zareth was right, and there was no going back. She belonged to him, and he belonged to her, and in a way that transcended species or worlds or any rational explanation. When they finally emerged from his dwelling, the settlement was buzzing with activity, and word had spread quickly about what had happened. Lisa found Maya first, and her eyes wide, and Maya, "And what did you do?" "What? I wanted," Maya said, and smiling despite herself. Stephen was less enthusiastic, and Lieutenant, "And are you insane? And he's an alien, is also the person who saved our lives," Maya said, and the person I want to be with." "But what about your career?" Stephen demanded, "and what about Earth?" Maya had thought about that, and all through the night, between moments of passion and connection. "And I will visit," she said, and I will make sure you all get home, but my place is here now, and with Zareth." Jake just hugged her. "And congratulations, Lieutenant," he said, "and I hope you will be happy." The council called for Maya and Zareth later that day, and when they stood before the elders, Maya noticed that Zareth held himself differently and more confident and more complete. "You have bonded," the eldest said. "And it was not a question," "Yes," Maya said. "And I have chosen to stay with Zareth and with the Kael, and if you will have me." The eldest studied them for a long moment and then smiled, and it was the first smile Maya had seen from her. "And the breeding cycle has chosen for you," she said. "And who are we to argue with? Biology?" The scarred council member looked displeased but said nothing. "You are welcome here," the eldest continued, "and you and your people, and you have proven yourselves worthy and proven that the unknown can indeed be a gift." Maya felt tears prick her eyes, and she squeezed Zareth's hand. "Thank you," she said. Over the next few weeks, arrangements were made for Stephen and Lisa and Jake to return to the orbital station, and from there they would report back to Earth Command. And Maya spent hours composing messages and explaining her decision, and knowing some would understand and others would not. But she was at peace with her choice. The night before her team was scheduled to leave, Maya stood with Zareth on a cliff overlooking the bioluminescent forest, and the view was breathtaking, and the entire landscape glowing like a living galaxy. "Are you certain?" Zareth asked, "and you are giving up everything you knew?" Maya leaned into him, and feeling the warmth of his body and the steady rhythm of his breathing. "And I am not giving up anything," she said, "and I am gaining everything." Zareth wrapped his arms around her, and the bond between them, humming with contentment and shared love. "I will spend my life making sure you never regret this decision," he said. Maya turned in his arms and kissed him. "And I already know I will not." The next morning, she said goodbye to her team, and Lisa hugged her tight and promising to visit, and Stephen shook her hand, and respect in his eyes despite his earlier objections, and Jake saluted and then hugged her too. "Take care of yourself, Lieutenant," he said. "You too, Corporal," Maya said. She watched as their transport lifted off and disappearing into the purple sky, and then she turned back to the settlement and to Zareth and to her new life. The breeding cycle eventually passed, and the intensity of the hormones fading, but the bond remained, and strong and unbreakable, and Maya discovered that life among the Kael was challenging and rewarding and full of wonders. She learned their language fluently and studied their medicine and their science, and eventually became something of an ambassador between the Kael and the humans who occasionally visited. She and Zareth built a dwelling on the edge of the forest, and a place where they could be together and watch the sunset and share their lives. And when the next breeding cycle came around, Maya understood what Zareth had tried to explain, and the intensity and the need and the absolute certainty that they were meant to be together. They had 3 children over the years, and hybrid beings who carried the best traits of both species and who would grow up knowing 2 worlds and 2 cultures. Maya never regretted her decision, and not for a single moment. She had come to an alien world seeking knowledge and discovery, and she had found something far more precious. She had found home. And as she stood, watching her children play in the bioluminescent forest, and Zareth beside her and his hand in hers, and she knew that sometimes the best discoveries were the ones you never planned to make. Sometimes you just had to trust biology and trust fate, and trust that the universe knew what it was doing, even when it made absolutely no sense at all. Maya Brooks had offered her trust to an alien who promised protection, and what she received in return was love and family, and a place to belong. The breeding cycle had brought them together, but it was choice and commitment and the bond between 2 souls that kept them together, and that made all the difference.